I'd like to first thank you all for coming today. I'm excited to see so many faces, people that I haven't met before. My name is Lisa Perkins, and I would like to kind of tell you a little bit about my background. Before we get started on that, though, I first need to tell you that I am not a doctor, and I don't even play one on the internet. So all of the information that I'm providing to you today is for informational purposes only. It does not take the place of advice that you're getting from a licensed medical practitioner, so please keep that in mind throughout the day. So just needed to cover that. So today's discussion questions, what we're going to be focusing on today is, first of all, what is metabolic syndrome? Who does it impact? And you may be surprised how much it might impact you. How it's typically treated. Is it possible that there is a better way? Hint, yes, that's why we're here today. How can the paleo diet help prevent and reverse metabolic syndrome? And what are your action steps? What are the tangible takeaways from today? So I definitely am not going to leave you hanging on that. So the 10,000-foot view about all of this is, why do we care about any of this? Why are we here talking about this today? Why? I assume that everyone is here today because they want to improve their health status, right? But everyone has a different why, and it's very important for you to understand what your deeper why is besides wanting to look good in a bathing suit, right? So you may want to look, feel, and perform better at life. You may want to be around for your children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren. You may want to remain mobile and independent for as long as possible. I know that's a goal for myself. You may want to avoid the chronic and disabling effects that we've come to associate with normal aging, and I'm going to put normal in quotes, including medications and all of their associated side effects. What I'm here to tell you today is, whatever your why is, whatever health condition you may be facing, I can virtually guarantee that the paleo diet will make a difference to you. And one of the things that my mother encouraged me to say out loud, this is something that I don't often think about, is that there are no downsides to a paleo diet. We're going to talk about what it is not, but I will tell you, it is not any kind of extreme approach. It's not any kind of restricted calorie diet. It's not a juice cleanse. It's not anything, no fads here. There are no tricks. So, as it says here, the paleo lifestyle and diet, it's not a gimmick. There are no magic pills, shakes, or instant transformations. It's essentially a lifestyle change, and that sounds onerous, and it really is not. So I want to say, first of all, this is not just about fat loss. So my story with coming to the paleo diet, I spent much of my adult life feeling sick, feeling tired, being overweight, and having chronic migraines. And I didn't understand it. I was eating a healthy diet. I was basically a vegetarian. I exercised all the time, couldn't shed the weight, couldn't mobilize my energy, didn't know what the problem was. So about 7 years ago, I just happened to stumble upon gluten as a potential problem, and that was nothing short of miraculous for me. Getting off gluten, I resolved the headaches. I spontaneously lost about 15 pounds, felt infinitely better, but there were still some unresolved issues. About 3 years ago, I just happened to stumble upon paleo, as some of you, I think, may have. And it piqued my interest. And I have a master's in library science. I have just an inquisitive mind. And so I dove into the research. What is this paleo diet, and what could it do for me? We're going to talk about what it is, but I will tell you that I dove headlong into it, and almost immediately it resolved my final symptoms. My energy levels stabilized. I just felt infinitely better and was able to shed those last few pounds. In addition, it improved my blood markers. My HDL went up, my LDL went down, my blood sugar finally stabilized. So that prompted me to really want to look into this further. So again, I was not eating an unhealthy diet. So I just wanted to show you kind of a pictorial example of my journey. So this is me back in 2005, age 37, on a high-carb vegetarian diet. The middle one is me in 2010, after going gluten-free and feeling a lot better. I was teaching at a middle school, so we were doing a fitness demonstration. And definitely feeling better, but obviously still, a little bit overweight, and again, my energy was not stabilized. The final picture is me a couple of days ago at age 46, feeling better than I have felt in 20 years. I mean, essentially what I feel like, and this has nothing to do with aesthetics, I feel on the inside like I have reverse aged. I feel so much better. And again, none of this is a gimmick, and that is what has just been amazing for me. So I want to give you a little warning. The talk that I'm going to do today is going to get a little sciencey. I'm not going to go too deep into the science, but I feel like it's important for you to understand a little bit about what metabolic syndrome is, again, why we should care about it, and how the paleo diet scientifically addresses those issues and a better quality of life. Okay, so before we launch into it, I want you to be thinking about yourself, your history, your health history, your genetics, and your deeper why as we go through this. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is metabolic syndrome. And the first thing to understand, and I didn't understand this until I really started looking into it, is that, first of all, how many of you have heard of metabolic syndrome? Okay, pretty much everybody. Metabolic syndrome is not a disease in and of itself. Rather, it is a constellation of clinical risk factors that doctors look at. And those risk factors predispose you to cardiovascular disease, stroke, kidney disease, and type 2 diabetes. So, metabolic syndrome, you may have heard of syndrome X, cardiometabolic syndrome, and insulin resistance syndrome. Those are all synonyms for metabolic syndrome. And interestingly enough, and this is something that is very relevant to today's talk, metabolic syndrome and prediabetes appear to be the same disorder. They are diagnosed by a different set of biomarkers, but that's very important to keep in mind. Okay, so again, it's not a disease, it's a cluster of conditions. And for an official diagnosis of metabolic syndrome, you need to have 3 of these 5 conditions: elevated blood pressure, excess body fat around the waist, low HDL, we're going to go into each of these a little bit more in depth, high triglycerides, and an elevated fasting blood glucose level. I want to mention, if you have questions, please jot them down. There was scratch paper up there, and I'll take time to answer all of your questions when we're finished. Okay, so the first risk factor, a normal blood pressure is 120/80. A sign of metabolic syndrome is the top number exceeds 130 or the bottom number exceeds 85. To be honest, that's not really that high, but it's very important. High blood pressure is actually the leading cause of death in the world today, so this is a big one. It's really important to be watching your blood pressure. Risk factor 2, expanded waist circumference. For men, it's a waist measurement greater than 40. For women, greater than 35. Again, that's really not that big, right? But it's one of those things, it's just a little hint to you that something may be brewing. So when we start putting on weight around our middle, and again, that's more of an apple shape than a pear shape, that's a sign of insulin resistance. And that is going to be a big theme of today's talk, insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is thought to be the root cause of metabolic syndrome. So here with my English teacher mother, this is a good example of foreshadowing what we're going to talk about today. So keep that insulin resistance term in mind. Okay, so again, the large waistline, an indicator of metabolic syndrome. Risk factor number 3, low HDL. Now this is another thing that I didn't really understand. How many of you think that HDL is a form of cholesterol? I did. That's what I thought. Actually, HDL is essentially a garbage truck that goes around your body, picks up excess cholesterol, takes it back to the liver for disposal. So high HDL is very, very important so that the bad cholesterol in your body, the LDL and triglycerides, don't build up. So that's why your doctor is always trying to get you to boost your HDL number, okay? So risk factor in men is less than 40 milligrams per deciliter, and for women, less than 50. Does anyone here know their HDL status? Okay. Interestingly enough, a lot of times on a cholesterol panel, what you see is total cholesterol numbers, but that really doesn't matter. The total number is not really what matters. It's breaking it down and looking at each of these numbers individually. Okay, high triglycerides is risk number 4. So triglycerides are a blood fat, and the reason that they tend to go up is when we're eating a diet that is very high in carbohydrates. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what carbohydrates are, but essentially when I say high carbohydrate diet, I'm talking about a standard American diet with high processed foods, lots of bread, lots of pasta, muffins, pizza, that kind of thing. So on that kind of diet, your triglyceride levels tend to rise, okay? I'm going to say this again later, but I want you to keep in mind, a lot of people say, but, you know, it's my genetics. That's just what it is. Well, I will tell you that it's really important to keep in mind all of this stuff can be modified by lifestyle. Yes, genetics may be the gun, but your lifestyle, what you put in your body, how you exercise, how you sleep, that's what pulls the trigger or doesn't pull the trigger. And that's where we're hoping to get you all. Okay, risk factor number 5. Once you're here, you're in a bad place. You're well on your way towards metabolic syndrome or type 2 diabetes. So if you have an elevated fasting blood glucose level over 100, you need to take that extremely seriously. So anything over 126 is full-blown diabetes, but keep in mind, this is all on a continuum. So say, for example, you are at 110, you think, oh, I'm not diabetic, I'm fine. But look at this, for every 1 point you're over 100, your risk of heart disease goes up by 1%. So if you're at 110, what's your risk increase? 10%, that's right. So that's a pretty important thing to monitor. So, questions for you. How many of you have been told by your doctor that you have any of these risk factors? Okay, yeah. So if you have any one of these, again, this is on a spectrum. This is your body saying, hello, something's happening here. So just because you don't have all 3, you still need to care about this. You don't want to get to the point where you have all 3 or 4 or 5, because chances are if you have 2 of these, you probably have 3 and you're headed towards having 4 or 5. So we want to nip this stuff in the bud, right? We don't want to just avoid disease, we want to achieve optimal health, right? That's my goal. So, okay, if you do have 3, you're not alone. Okay, according to the American College of Cardiology, metabolic syndrome affects 34% of adults in the United States, or approximately 64 million people. This is actually a conservative number. I have seen numbers upwards of 80 million. So this is a very conservative number. This is a 34% increase from 1990, and interestingly enough, much of the increase that we're seeing is in younger women, aged 20 to 39, specifically expanded waistlines. That's what we're seeing. So also keep in mind, this kind of part and parcel, 1/3 of the adults in the US are overweight and 1/3 are obese. Now that's calculated according to your BMI, and actually at the end of this presentation I have the way to calculate your BMI if you don't know it, so you may want to stick around and look at that slide. It's kind of interesting. So, all right, so what causes metabolic syndrome? And you know, we had our little foreshadowing. Well, here we are. We alluded to this previously. Insulin resistance is thought to be the root cause, the precursor for all of these conditions. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about today, is addressing insulin resistance. Okay, so we have to talk about hormone. Again, I warned you we're going to get just a little bit sciencey, and I'll try not to cause your eyes to glaze over because I can do that to people in about 4 seconds flat. So I'm going to really try not to do that here. But this is important to understand that the hormone insulin is secreted when we consume carbohydrates. It's a very important hormone, we need it, but what it does, insulin is essentially our body's storage hormone. So when insulin is present, whenever we eat a carbohydrate-rich meal, essentially what happens is it is like a key opening the door to our fat cells and saying, it's knocking on the door, the fat cell says, oh, the receptors open up, energy can go in. In a healthy human being, that's good. That energy goes in, and then between meals, it slides right back out, and we use it for energy. What happens, unfortunately, though, okay, so here's our picture of our carb-rich meal here. Just back up a little bit. These are the kind of carbohydrates that I'm talking about. There are some healthier forms of carbohydrates. These are the carbohydrates that we tend to consume the most in the United States. These are the ones that stimulate a huge insulin response, okay? These are the refined carbs and sugars that the standard American diet is really predicated on. So, I'm not gonna bore you with that. All right, so we talked about that. So, insulin resistance, what's happening here? Basically, when we eat too many carbohydrates chronically, our insulin is raised throughout the day. And what happens is our cells essentially are full. They are full of energy. And when insulin comes knocking on the door, the cells say, sorry, we are full. Go elsewhere. Well, so what's going to happen to that blood sugar? Can it just circulate through our body? We can't do that, right? Our bodies do not want more than about a teaspoon of sugar circulating at all times. So it triggers more insulin, because we have got to get those cells open, right? We've got to dispose of that glucose somehow. So essentially what happens is we're creating and secreting more and more insulin, and eventually our cells become resistant. So that's a kind of an overview. Insulin resistance occurs because our body is exposed to too much insulin. An overabundance of insulin is triggered when we chronically eat too many carbs. The cells no longer respond to insulin in the correct way. The doors remain shut. Okay. This can lead, again, to insulin resistance and eventually to type 2 diabetes. A question that I hear is, are these two things the same? Not necessarily. You can actually be insulin resistant in certain parts of your body, like in your muscles, in your fat cells. It's when you're insulin resistant in your liver, that's when it tends to turn to diabetes. But it's still very, very serious, even if you don't develop diabetes. Okay, so how do you know? How do you know any of this is brewing, right? Without going to the doctor, it's like, well, how do I know if I'm eating too many carbs? How do I know if I'm developing insulin resistance? Well, this is how you know. There's basically 4 stages of this. And in the first stage, now again, I'm going to back up and say, it is vital for you to get your blood markers tested every year to find out what your cholesterol is doing, your waist circumference, your blood pressure, and your blood glucose levels. Stage 1, your body is basically whispering to you. It's just saying, hey, heads up, this isn't going so well. I've got elevated triglycerides, elevated LDL, lowered HDL, okay? Stage 2 and 3, your body is beginning to speak louder. You're getting that abdominal obesity, elevated blood pressure, more decreased HDL, okay? So if you're monitoring this, you'll know something's brewing, but if you're not, it'd be hard, there's no overt symptoms. Stage 4, your body is essentially screaming at you, you've got elevated fasting blood sugar, okay? So it's really on a continuum here, so it's crucial that you kind of keep that monitored. So, why? Why are we talking about this today? Why is this such a big deal? The reason that insulin resistance has become such an issue today, there are 3 primary changes basically that have taken place over the course of human history. The first one is the shift from primarily a protein, vegetable, and fruit-centric diet. Today, the standard American diet is dominated 70% by simple carbohydrates and low-fat dairy products. Okay, so that is a dramatic shift in our environment. So that's one of the reasons. One of the second reasons, and this is something that we don't talk about, and again, the paleo lifestyle really addresses this, is chronic stress. Now, stress seems like kind of well, we can't really control it. Well, we need to, because the problem is that cortisol, our stress hormone, impacts insulin's ability to work properly. So it's something that, it's easier said than done, but it's important to consider. The third very big change is our decreased movement and exercise. So studies show that our ancient ancestors probably walked about 10 or 15 miles a day. How many of you walk 10 or 15 miles a day? Yeah, one of you. Okay. All right, I know I don't. I do have a standing workstation at work because chronic sitting really is going to lead to insulin resistance, okay? So getting up and moving. Study after study shows that you are immediately insulin sensitive post-exercise, even after very brief bouts. This does not mean you have to go out and run 5 miles. This doesn't mean you have to go and pump a ton of weights in the gym. This means that you need to get up and take a walk. You need to do a very light level of exercise to increase your insulin sensitivity. The way you're doing that is you're burning some of that energy out of your cells so that when insulin comes knocking, they will open the door. If your cells are so packed with carbohydrate and you're not burning any of that off through movement, there is no way that you will not become insulin resistant. Okay, here's another, we're kind of referring back to that earlier slide. What about my genetics? Isn't all of this predetermined? Well, partially yes. I mean, definitely we have to deal somewhat with the cards we're dealt, right? In terms of our childhood, in terms of our genetics, but we have a huge role to play here. All of this, all of these symptoms are 100% preventable, and studies are increasingly showing that they are reversible. No matter how far, that type 2 diabetes, 100% reversible. Did any of you know that?
Yes.
I did not know that. I was shocked. So that, that is very hopeful to me. So again, most people eating the standard American diet, acronym, SAD, I think it's a very apt term there. It's typically upwards of 50% carbohydrate. And your chances, I don't care what your genetics are, eating this diet for years on end, your chances of developing some degree of insulin resistance is extremely high, regardless of your background. So, all right. So how is it conventionally treated? I'm not going to focus too much on this, but I just want you to keep in mind that essentially we are going into the pharmaceutical grab bag in order to treat all of these conditions that are associated with metabolic syndrome. Any of you ever taken medication and had side effects? Yeah, okay. I definitely have as well. So, just statins alone, a $26 billion industry worldwide. There is a lot of incentive for doctors to be prescribing statins. There are a lot of side effects from statins, and the sad reality is that you can fix this yourself. I mean, I'm not advocating any of you go off statins if you're on a statin, but it is really something to consider changing your lifestyle, changing your eating habits, and then going back and talking to your doctor and having things retested. So, conventional treatment are things like bariatric surgery, extreme dieting, excessive exercise, and medications. And I would advocate that there is a better way. And my strong belief is that this is one of the best ways to address all of these things and more. Again, I mentioned to a few of you that I will be talking about the paleo diet just for weight loss in a couple of weeks, and I'll let you know the date for that. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit, but I want to talk somewhat about what the paleo diet is and how it helps with the conditions that we've just discussed. So here is the premise of the paleo diet. The first one is that most chronic Western diseases that we've really come to accept are just the natural course of aging, are preventable and even reversible. Okay, they're diseases of lifestyle. We do not have to get arthritis. We don't have to get heart disease. We don't have to get hypertension. These are not inevitable. So that's one of the premises. Another premise is that diet is preferable to drugs. Sometimes there is, you have to resort to drugs, but let's do whatever we can before we get to that point. The problem is that drugs do not address the root cause of a problem, right? They are masking symptoms or addressing symptoms, so often with damaging side effects. Another premise is the refined carbs and sugar are extremely problematic. We've touched on that just a little bit. And they are likely the root cause of many chronic illnesses, not just the ones that we've talked about today, but autoimmune conditions, depression, Alzheimer's, many, many conditions. So paleo diet says that we should be eating real food that is nutrient dense, delicious, and health promoting. So this just talks about some of the health benefits of a paleo lifestyle, and some of these things that we've talked about. But these are just a few more here. All right. So what does the paleo diet include? One of the misconceptions about the paleo diet is that it's extremely high protein. Have any of you heard that?
Yes.
Okay. That is not true. It's shocking. If you look at basically the meal template of my family, it starts with vegetables. The bulk of our plate is vegetables. We have a modest amount of protein and a modest amount of fat, but vegetables is the base for every one of our meals, including breakfast. So paleo, essentially, this, in a nutshell, it's whole foods as close to their natural state as possible, nutrient-dense sources of proteins, fats, and plants that our bodies were designed to digest, okay? One thing to keep in mind is that agriculture was not introduced to humans until about 10,000 years ago. So yes, we have evolved somewhat, but we have not evolved all the way. And we were having a discussion before we started today about soaking and sprouting quinoa, and that's one of the ways that you can kind of help with that digestion. So it includes grass-fed and pastured meat, eggs, fish, seafood, vegetables, fruits, nuts, and seeds. So this is kind of what it looks like here. Well, this is the standard American diet. So here in the blue, I don't know if you can read this, processed foods. Isn't that shocking? Okay. Red, animal products. Green, vegetables, fruits, nuts, and beans. And whole grains are in yellow. So not a great ratio, I would argue. This is the macronutrient ratio on a paleo diet. So about 40% fat, and we're going to talk about fat because that's a scary topic. It certainly was for me. Look at this, vegetables. About 40% of your macronutrients are coming from vegetables. Fruits, nuts, seeds, eggs, herbs, spices, meats, and fish. Notice here the meat and fish. This is not an ultra high protein diet. That is not what the paleo diet is based on. So I'm going to go through these quickly. These are some of the protein sources, essentially what you would expect. Vegetables, pretty much everything under the sun. Fruits, all the fruits. Nuts and seeds. These are some of the things that are considered kind of paleo superfoods, and these are kind of the next level. We eat a lot of liver and other organs at our house, much to the chagrin of my daughter. I never in my wildest dreams thought I'd be eating a liver. I can tell you that. But it is, you want to talk about a superfood, it has been phenomenal. Bone broth, that's another big one. So these are just powerhouses of nutrition. So liquids, pretty self-explanatory. Paleo fat sources. Now this is probably the biggest learning curve, I think, for people, is understanding that the industrial seed oils like canola and soybean oils are highly, highly inflammatory. Our bodies were not designed. You should go on YouTube and look up a video for how they make canola oil, and I promise you, you will not buy those chips again. It is shocking what it does. It basically sets off an inflammatory cascade in your body, which many of you may know, inflammation is at the root cause of many diseases. So vegetable oils, no bueno at all. So what we're looking for as far as paleo fat sources, we're looking for animal fat, butter. Didn't think in my adult life I'd be eating butter. 20 years I didn't eat butter, and I eat quite a bit now. Ghee, lard, duck fat, other seed oils, olive oil, macadamia nut oil, avocado oil, great sources of fat. So that to me was just kind of the biggest learning curve. Again, fat sources to exclude are, you know, basically the man-made fats and refined seed oils. Okay, so why the shift in fat sources? This is, again, a tiny bit sciencey, but I'm just going to throw this out there as something to consider. The ideal ratio for our fat source is 1-to-1, omega-3 to omega-6. In a standard Western diet, you're getting about 15 to 17 to 1. Why is that? Let's go back to that earlier slide where we showed in blue all of the fast food, basically, that we're eating. All of that is made from these refined seed oils, which are extremely high in omega-6, okay? So getting those out of our diet helps that ratio. Even if you don't add in a ton of omega-3, that's what's interesting. You don't have to eat that much omega-3 if you get the omega-6 down, okay? It's not like you're having to eat, you know, an entire salmon every day or something like that. It's really not that hard. But what that does is it decreases inflammation throughout your body and really promotes your brain health. It mitigates cancer, all kinds of things. So that omega-6, omega-3 ratio, while that may sound extremely esoteric, it's actually very important. Okay, here's another thing. Learning to eat fat again was probably the hardest shift for me in shifting to a paleo diet. I mean, it was just a mind bender. I was like, what? No, I can't. I'll be fat. So does fat intake promote insulin resistance? It absolutely does not, unless you're eating a hypercaloric diet, which means too many calories. Eating fat by itself, essentially we use it for energy. It does not go into our cells for fat storage. But having said that, if you're eating a bunch of fat in the presence of a bunch of carbohydrate, you will be in trouble. Because again, what does that insulin and carbohydrate do? Opens the doors to the fat cells. It is our storage hormone. So if you're eating a hamburger, what is that? Fat and carbs, right? Perfect storm for fat storage. Pizza, same thing. Carbs as the base, fat on top. Perfect storm for fat storage, right? All those delicious things that taste so good together. Okay, so paleo diet, yes, there are difference in macronutrient ratios, difference in things that we include, but one of the main premises of the paleo diet is increasing food quality. That is very, very important. Paleo excludes processed, refined, and packaged foods, right? So as a general rule, I like to say to people, if it has a barcode, skip it, right? Obviously, that's not always the case, and you know, we've got seeds up here that, you know, have a barcode on them. But eating food that is as close to its natural state, you're going to be in much better shape. It excludes sugar because of all of the trouble that it brings, the inflammation, the insulin resistance. Grains, again, for the reason that I mentioned, our bodies just evolutionarily have not caught up to being able to digest grains very well. It can lead to things like leaky gut syndrome. How many of you have heard of that? I know that's an odd one, and that's something that I'm going to give a talk on. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now, but basically, grains, if you are not digesting them well, they open up the tight junctions in your gut, allowing foreign proteins to cross that gut barrier and get out into your system. That is the root cause of autoimmune disease. So getting grains out of your diet, I guarantee you, you will feel better. It's, even if you just try it briefly, again, all of the things I'm recommending here, there's nothing harmful. We don't have any biological need for grains. And I'm going to show you that we can actually get the nutrients that we would have gotten from grains much more efficiently from these other food sources. So, not going to go too deeply into this. How does paleo improve metabolic health? I've included in here a few studies. I just want to show you there is a scientific basis for all of these things. This is a study that showed that people with heart disease, after just 7 days on a paleo diet, improved the status of their circulatory, carbohydrate, and lipid metabolism markedly. Huge, huge improvement in just 7 days. Okay, so we've gone deep, deep down into the details, and I want to come back up a little bit to that 10,000-foot view. And I want to talk about change, right? Because a lot of us have a lot of information, right? But implementing that change, that's hard, right? Okay, so essentially, as a culture, we're immersed in a food environment that is full of hyper-palatable, hyper-caloric foods that make us crave more and eat more. It is not our fault that we do this. There are industries, whole industries built on trying to get us to eat more and more of this absolutely delicious food, right? Eating higher quality, less hyperpalatable, less calorically dense foods make implementing change easier, and I'm going to talk about that. Okay, so how, on a concrete level, does a paleo diet make sustainable fat loss easier? Now, I just want to relate this back to metabolic syndrome. Getting all of the carbohydrate down in your diet, but also shedding excess fat is going to improve all of those markers for metabolic syndrome. So this does all tie together. This is not a separate topic, okay? So a paleo diet is inherently, because we're taking out all of those grains, all those refined foods, it's inherently lower in carbohydrate. And therefore, it increases glucose tolerance and insulin sensitivity. A paleo diet has increased micronutrient density. Okay, so we've talked about the macronutrients. We've got protein, fat, and carbohydrate, right? Those are macronutrients. That's what we get calories from. Micronutrients, where do you think you get those from? What would those be considered? Like vitamin A, you know, the vitamins, right? So the things that we associate with vegetables, like what would you typically find in, say, a carrot? Vitamin A, beta carotene, correct. So the paleo diet has huge micronutrient density. What that does, and I'm going to show you just very briefly a study that proves this, it actually reduces hunger signals and improves satiety. That was shocking to me. I could not believe that our body was really that smart, but studies have borne that out. Paleo diet is less hyperpalatable. Does anyone know what hyperpalatable might mean? Okay, so a hyperpalatable food, an example of that would be something like nacho cheese Doritos, right? Okay, so I guess that's further down. Okay, so if you take, let's say for example, you go to a restaurant, you have an extremely satisfying meal, you're full, you pushed your plate away, you're fine, you're done for the evening. Then the waiter comes around with a hot fudge sundae brownie with vanilla and caramel, and the smells are wafting up to you, puts it right in front of you. What are you going to want to do? Despite the fact that you're full from this meal, what are you going to want to do? You're going to want to dig into that, right? And if you don't dig into it, how hard was that, right? Okay, if the waiter instead came back to you with a plate of boiled potatoes with no salt, no butter, nothing on them, set that in front of you, how tempting would that be? Not very tempting, right? Be like, I'm full, I just ate, I don't want any of that, okay? So the juxtaposition between those two shows you what a hyper-palatable food is. The brownie has a high food reward, essentially. So it is designed to ignite all of our kind of excitement, our neurotransmitters. It gives us a huge dopamine rush, right? So I'm not saying that the paleo diet isn't delicious, but you really do have to change your taste buds. It does not include hyper-palatable foods like that because you're eating as close to nature as you possibly can. And natural foods are not hyper-palatable, are they? Right? They're good food and they taste good, especially if you're hungry. Okay, the last one, again, just a tiny bit sciencey. We're going to talk about leptin sensitivity. And the paleo diet does improve leptin sensitivity, and I'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so just briefly, paleo diet is inherently lower in carbs, regardless of your template. I'm not going to go too deeply into this. Essentially, depending on your activity levels, whether you're an athlete, you are going to have a different carbohydrate ratio, right? But I don't care what carbohydrate ratio you're on a paleo diet, it's going to be lower in carbs than the standard American diet. There's no way around it, okay? What that does is it reduces those insulin highs and lows that you're getting from having that constant carb influx. What that does is improves your appetite regulation. It makes this approach much more sustainable over the long haul. So, how many of you have ever lost weight and gained it back? Right? Okay. So you're in good company because that applies to 99% of people that lose weight. In fact, about 66% of those actually gain more. Why? Because they did not change their diet. They did not change their approach to food, right? They are just basically starving themselves and then going back to the same way they were eating before, okay? This dietary approach makes this sustainable, and I don't, this is a tough word to throw around, but I'm going to do it anyway. It makes it essentially effortless. It really does. If you're eating foods that are not hyperpalatable, you're able to eat when you're hungry, you're not having to track everything, you're not having to count calories. Just eat your food and live your life. Treat food like the wonderful gift from God that it is, and move on. Do other things. You know, so many of us are so obsessed with our diet and with restricting calories, it's exhausting, right? This approach shoves all that aside. Okay, and again, it improves insulin sensitivity. Okay, so lower carbohydrate diet, this study shows that it improves fasting blood glucose levels. Again, I'm not going to go into that, but after 12 weeks, there was a 26% decrease in fasting blood glucose levels compared with a 7% decrease in the other group, Mediterranean group. Okay, so micronutrient density. Again, going back to how smart our bodies are. So 2010 study compared the satiation levels. Does anyone know what satiation or satiety means? Just satisfied, exactly. The satisfaction levels of people on a Mediterranean versus a paleo diet. The results were that the Paleolithic group were as satiated as the Mediterranean group, but consumed less energy per day. And the study goes on to show that they lost quite a bit of weight with the same satisfaction levels. They did not have any extra hunger, okay? And the conclusion was that a paleo diet is more satiating per calorie than a Mediterranean diet, which is high in carbohydrate. Okay, micronutrient density, this one to me was the shocker. It actually reduces your hunger signals, okay? A 2010 study found that it's not just the caloric content, but it's the micronutrient density that influenced the experience of hunger. And it says that it appears that a high nutrient density diet after, this is something to keep in mind, after an initial phase of adjustment during which a person experiences toxic hunger due to withdrawal from pro-inflammatory foods can result in a sustainable eating pattern that leads to weight loss and improved health. So essentially what they're saying is that once you kind of get past that withdrawal from these hyperpalatable, high carbohydrate foods, that essentially you can just go on to eat and feel satisfied and lose weight pretty much effortlessly. Okay, hyperpalatability and food reward. We talked about this a little bit already. So, food products today are designed to have high reward. They are formulated so we can't eat just one. They are doing that deliberately, right? I mean, seriously, how many of you have sat down to chips or whatever it is? You know, Twinkies, cookies, you can't stop. You literally can't stop. And that makes us feel weak. It makes us feel like we have no willpower. They're smart. They're very smart. And they're making a lot of money, okay? So natural foods don't do this. All right, so a little bit sciencey, but this is something to really keep in mind. Leptin is our satiety hormone. It is emitted from our fat cells in a system that is working well, and you're not leptin resistant. Essentially, after you eat, your cells fill up with energy, your fat cells emit leptin, it goes to your brain, it says, hey, thanks, that was awesome, I've had enough, I'm done, okay? Well, the problem is that just like with insulin resistance, you can develop leptin resistance. If you're eating a high sugar, high carbohydrate diet, leptin is constantly being released into your system. Over time, if you're exposed to too much, your body resists leptin just as it does with insulin. What is the way to reestablish leptin sensitivity? Getting the carbs down, right, in a healthy way. And studies have shown that that indeed occurs. Okay, so let's talk about habit change. We're almost done with this. So, as we said, we live in a food environment that promotes calorie-dense, fattening food. We need to modify that environment, right? Where should we probably start by modifying that environment? In our own kitchens, right? Yeah. So, if you come home from a stressful day at the office or at work and you're hungry, you know you need to make dinner, but there's a bag of chips on the counter, that's going to be tough, right? That's going to be really tough to resist that. What if those chips were not there? What if they were not in your house? That's going to make it a lot easier to resist, right? I mean, that's a simple thing, and I don't mean to say that in a condescending way because it applies to myself. I know myself, and if there is something in that house that is, you know, my go-to food, you can bet I'm going to skip over the liver and broccoli and go straight to that thing. So get it out of your house. It's no joke. It really makes a big difference. Okay, important thing to keep in mind, draconian approaches to caloric restriction do not work over time. Again, I'm going to go into this in our fat loss seminar quite a bit more as far as your body being a thermostat. If you restrict calories for too long, your body will adjust by reducing energy expenditure. And we don't want that because pretty soon you're going to get to the point where you're eating 800 calories and your weight is still not budging. A paleo diet is a permanent change that does not require that calorie restriction. What we need to do is change our relationship with food. See it as food, see it as a wonderful blessing and not as the enemy, because I know that's how I felt for many, many years. Okay, so what are some action steps that we can take away today? You all saw the flyer up there for the Paleo meetup. We are just starting a group, my partner Adam and I, we're starting a group on January 25th, and we basically just want people to get together and talk about this stuff. We want to support one another because we know that social support is crucial with this kind of thing. If you're doing this all by yourself, say nobody else in your household is doing it, your friends aren't doing it, somebody mentioned that everybody thinks they're crazy for this kind of approach, it's going to be really tough to stick with it, right? You're going to be like, oh, I'll just have the pizza. That's fine. I don't want to stand out and be weird. Creating a strong social network is the key to kind of lifting all of us up, right? So please come to that. We're not selling anything. We just want to get together as a group and form a community. That's what we're doing. So again, clean out your pantry. Go home today. Throw the junk away. Does anyone in your house need Ho-Hos? Does anyone in your house need Little Debbie snack cakes? I would argue, I don't care if you've got a 4-year-old in your house. They don't need that. They really don't, okay? I had a handout up there on just a quick start guide to fat loss with paleo. Again, this is just a basic overview, but it will help you if you're starting from scratch, okay? Email me with any questions. I will be more than happy to answer your questions. So my email is on that flyer. And if you would like to go further at some point, feel free to schedule a consultation with me. I offer individualized coaching, support, and guidance. I am also, I don't think I mentioned, a personal trainer. I train people at a private gym, so I do that, and the nutrition coaching. So just want to say thank you so much for coming. And I want to again mention that my next talk will be on February 28th on the paleo diet for fat loss, and that will be at the brand new Natural Grocers. So just if you want to watch their website, or if you come to the paleo meetup, then we'll mention that. But we'll go into a lot of that stuff more in depth, kind of the action steps that you can take. So
we'll also send out reminders when we have your email.
Yes, absolutely. So that's all I've got. So I am happy to